As we've always mentioned in our operating system installation videos, before you do any major change to an operating system, you want to always have a backup. Even if you're performing an upgrade or even a clean install, we want to make sure that we can go back to this previous configuration if we ever run into any problems. Also, always check the minimum requirements for the operating system that you're installing. You want to make sure that you have enough memory, have enough free disk space, and any other hardware requirements that you'll need to run the new operating system. It might also be a good idea to put the installation media into a drive, start that, and begin the upgrade advisor process before you ever do an installation. It will look over your hardware, it will look at all of your installed applications, and give you an idea of those apps and if the hardware is going to work properly once the new operating system is installed. If you're going to be installing a lot of different operating systems on this computer and you need to share files between all of those, you may want to choose the FAT32 file system during the install. And if it's a Windows operating system only, perhaps the NTFS option for file systems is going to be your best selection. For Windows 7, the hardware requirements for the 32-bit version is a 1 GHz processor. That's also the minimum for the 64-bit version. The 32-bit version needs at least 1 GB of RAM. The 64-bit version needs twice that to be able to have a minimum installation of Windows 7. We need 16 gigabytes of free disk space. We need 20, a little bit more, for the 64-bit version. And both of these versions need a DirectX 9 graphics device running that WDDM 1.0 or higher display version. This WDDM is a Windows display driver model. It's a standard for driver hardware, so we need to be sure that the hardware that we're using meets at least this minimum. I'm not going to install Windows 7 on a physical device. I'm going to build out a virtual machine in VirtualBox. And to do that, we'll click the new option. This particular machine is going to be in the auxiliary control center, and it's going to run not Linux, it's going to run Microsoft Windows, and we're going to choose the 32-bit of Windows 7. That's the version that I'm going to install in this case. I need a certain amount of memory. We know that Windows needs at least 1 gig of memory, so I'm going to specify that in this 32-bit version. Obviously, if this was the 64-bit version, we would need twice that amount. I don't have a drive configured already, but it recommends one that's at least 25 gig. Remember, we need at least 16 gig just to install Windows, so 25 would allow for Windows and a little bit more on that drive. That's a pretty good number, so let's create it right now. I'm going to use the VirtualBox disk image, that's the default. And then we get to decide whether we want all of this space dynamically allocated so it's built as we use it, or if I'd like to use a fixed size. This takes a little bit more time when you're first building it, but this will give you the best type of performance, so I'm going to choose fixed size. This is my aux control center disk, 25 gig. That all looks good. So now we'll create, and now VirtualBox will build out a 25 gig file on my storage of my computer that's going to be used for this virtual hard drive. If you have a computer with a physical DVD-ROM, you can put the Windows 7 installation media in that physical drive, and the virtual machine will use that. In my case, I don't have a DVD-ROM drive, but I can tell Windows 7 installation media that's in an ISO to connect to and use this virtual machine. So I'm going to go to the settings for our auxiliary control center, choose storage. I'm going to choose this empty DVD-ROM, and I'm going to choose a virtual DVD drive, and I have a Windows 7 Professional ISO file that I have on my machine. And now we have virtually added that DVD-ROM. I can click OK and start the machine. If you've run through the installation of Windows Vista before, you'll find that Windows 7 is very similar, especially in the prompts that you get. The first is the language to use, the time and currency format, and the keyboard. All of those match the version for my computer, so I'll click Next. You have an option here to simply click the Install button. If you're performing a repair of the operating system, you may want to move down to Repair Your Computer, and you'll have a number of prompts to go through depending on what you'd like to accomplish. In our case, we simply want to install the operating system. I'll click Install Now. We now get to choose the type of installation we'd like to do. If we were already running Windows Vista and we started the Windows 7 upgrade process from inside the Windows Vista operating system, we could choose the upgrade link. But we have a completely empty hard drive. There's no data on it, so we're going to choose the custom option that installs a new copy of Windows. Now we can choose where we would like to install Windows. If we would like to simply use the entire disk, we can click Next and Windows will automatically allocate that. We can also choose drive options and change the partitions, make different sized partitions, format them with different file types, and then Windows 7 will use those settings to install the OS. In this case, we're going to simply use this entire unallocated space to install Windows 7 and have it in one big partition. So let's click Next. And we'll now go through the process of copying files from the installation media to the drive itself. Once the copy process is finished, Windows will restart, and during this process, there may be a number of restarts before we're prompted to add additional information into the Windows 7 installation. Once the file copy and a couple of reboots have completed, we're now prompted to add a username and a computer name for this computer. The username for this one is going to be Rodney McKay, and this is going to be in our Auxiliary Control Center. Let's click Next to continue to the next prompt. We now need a password for this configuration. So we'll add this mix, and we'll say that this is our favorite color. I'm going to click Next. Now we're prompted for the product key for Windows 7. We want to be sure that we have our Windows 7 installation disks and media so that we can reference that and apply it to this. Obviously, every Windows installation has a different license key associated with it, so make sure you don't share this with anyone and make sure you don't lose it in case you need to reinstall Windows later. And then we're prompted as to how we would like Windows to update itself. Well, we'd like this to use the recommended settings, maybe have Windows only install important updates, or ask later. We'll decide later on how we would like to have Windows updated. I'm going to choose the recommended settings. Now we need to choose the time and date that we're going to use. Our time zone is going to be Mountain Time, and then you want to check that the date and the time are correct on this screen, and if they are, you can click Next. At this point, Windows 7 asks where you will be using this version of Windows. Is this going to be on a home network, a work network, or something that is in public? And Windows will adjust the security settings for the operating system depending on where you happen to be. This system will be at a workplace. Now Windows will finish the installation process and begin preparing the desktop for first use. And now we're finished. We've installed Windows, and now we have a desktop that we can use to complete any of the post-installation tasks. If this is your first time running Windows 7 on this hardware, we may want to test and make sure that our video driver is working properly, that we can print to any printers, and that way we can be sure that the OS did install and use that hardware correctly. We also want to be sure that we're updating the operating system, make sure that we're running the latest service pack, and also make sure that you have all of the latest security patches running on this OS. You can usually get both of those by running a Windows update. If you'd like to install additional security applications, this would be a good time to do it. Install antivirus and anti-malware software. There's probably also updated drivers that were not on the Windows installation DVD. So you may want to go out to those manufacturers' websites, get the latest printer drivers and the latest video drivers, and install that in your operating system as well. And lastly, if this is a clean install, then we will need to install any applications that might be used by the end user.
VirtualBox is an alternative to using VMware, or where in the old days you would use virtual PC. It allows 64-bit operating systems and other things, and especially for testing 2013 and other more advanced NAV features, it's a great product because it also performs very well. So I've already downloaded the VirtualBox here. So I'll just go through the install, and it's one of those simple ones. It's just like those next. It will give you a warning here that it actually will shut down the network interface for a short second. It's not different than what virtual PC did. It's just if you're running a live environment, you have to be careful that it actually will stop other machines to actually have access to the internet. So it's really only for production purposes. So, but I'm basically finished installing it. So it was a very, very simple process. The next thing I want to show here is actually how to install Windows 7 inside this one. So I'll create a new computer here, and I'll just call this one Windows 7. And it's based on my text automatically figured out that it was actually going to be Windows 7 down here, so that's fine. But that's important because selecting the right type down here is going to have the supporting software installed as driver inside the operating system. So if you're installing 2008 or Windows 8 or something like that one, remember to pick the right version down here of Windows. It also supports Linux and all kinds of other things in here. So, but I'll just say next, and I want a little more memory than this one, so I'll use 4 gig. You create a virtual drive, and it actually shares the VHD format that is the same as virtual PC uses, and also Hyper-V. But I'll just use the internal format. I don't think there's much difference in speed. But I guess the internal format is the best supported. So I had a 25 gig default down here. Since I'm going to install NAV and all kinds of things in here, I'm actually going to bump this up to a little more, to 40 gigabyte in here as being my hard drive. And it will create this one. My E drive is actually, in this case, it's a solid state drive, and that's why I already configured it earlier to use as my default. Go in and say yes and create this one. Before I start the installations, one thing I'm going to do in here is actually change my amount of processors, because it's going to install Windows a lot faster if I actually give it more CPUs in here. This one is a pretty powerful computer. It's a Core i7 and is actually running at a higher speed than what it nominal is. So it's running 4.2 gigahertz, and it has 8 threads and 4 cores in here. But I'm just going to give this computer 4. I'm now ready to start my installation. The next thing I have to do is select my image, and I have a Windows 7 with Service Pack 1 in here. That's a download from TechNet from Microsoft that I have this ISO file from. So I go ahead and open that one. And then I'll just start the install in here. And there's only a few things I will need to do to actually get this fully installed. During this install process. And it's fine. I want to install it now. Until you install the VirtualBox editions in here, the mouse can be a little sluggish, especially if you're in a remote desktop environment in here. So, but I just want to see it's my 40 gig hard drive. I'll just click next, and now it's expanding the Windows files. The first % here takes a little longer. The total process of installing Windows in here is probably going to be 6-7 minutes in total. But I'm going to remove some of this recording here. If I look at one of the reasons this computer is so fast as it is. It's running a Core i7, the 26K unlocked version, and it actually has been slightly overclocked. So it's currently on 4.2 gigahertz down here. So that's a processor speed. This one works fine also on a laptop. It just won't get this tremendously fast speed that this one has. This computer has 2 solid-state drives in it also. So it has a solid-state C drive on 64 gigabyte. It has a second solid-state drive also on 64 gigabyte. And if I go take a look at it here, I will have my C drive and my E drive is solid states, and then I have a 2 terabyte drive in here. It's a motherboard that already comes with graphic cards and 16 gig of RAM in here. So this computer cost less than $1,000 actually to buy and assemble from parts, and it's extremely powerful for running VirtualBox or any testing with the 2009 and 2013 of NAV. It now finished the first part where it actually copied all the files. It's now completing the installation here of Windows 7, and I will be able to soon type in the computer name and then install the VirtualBox editions that will make the drivers and Windows work. The really good thing about the VirtualBox is that it's completely free. It even works on multiple versions. So if you had a Linux server, you could actually also run VirtualBox, same environment as it is here. So it's now booting Windows for the first time for real after installing it. So I'll put in the username. I'll just call this one Windows 7. I have to type in a password. And a hint. It's the same password, of course. I don't need to put in a Windows key, and since it's so fast to install, I would just blow away this one when Windows actually, after a month, won't work any longer. It's all for testing anyway. I'll use the recommended setting. I'll go select Eastern time zone here. And my network is a work network, and it's now finished, and it's inside Windows 7 and it's installed. Now, of course, you need to run the Windows update also. But before I do anything else, I'm going to install the VirtualBox edition. That makes the mouse work a lot better and seamless resizing of the screen and things like that. So I'll install what is called guest editions down here. Take a few seconds before it shows up, but I basically put in a CD in the CD-ROM drive for this VirtualBox, and then it will run the software from the CD. It's a little busy here since it's just finished installing Windows, I guess. So I want to run the VirtualBox Windows editions. And that's fine. And I'll just check this one that I want to trust it all the time, so in future updates of VirtualBox I don't have to check that I want to run it here. And that was installing the VirtualBox editions in here, so I'll go ahead and reboot. So I'm now in Windows, and of course I could choose another drive in here. I'm just going to remove that one because I don't need the VirtualBox. One of the real nice things in here is that it's completely seamless to switch between full screen and windowed mode. And like you used to with remote desktop, you actually have an option down here to attach devices and all kinds of things. So but it completely disappears during the demo. So you can't see that you're actually running a virtual environment in here. All the issues that existed with VirtualBox being able to resize, or Virtual PC being able to resize properly, it absolutely don't exist with VirtualBox. You can just drag the window, it's going to look nice. You can always go full screen, and it will just completely cover your screen. So even if you connect it to a projector, it works perfectly fine in here. So you can always get back, of course, to the windowed mode. And it's running very, very fast in here. So this VirtualBox here can also be shared. So if I look at my drive here, I have in my VirtualBox folder, I have a couple of files in here, and this one is really the virtual drive, and that's where everything is in. So you can share that with other people. They can set up their own hardware around it, matching maybe their laptop and so on. But it's a very, very powerful system in here. The VirtualBox, and it's completely free. It don't require anything else than you have a decent laptop that runs 64-bit OS, and then you can install 64-bit operating system and get very, very good performance.